Good morning, everyone. Are you awake? Yeah, you're getting there? Okay. I know, I have my coffee beside me. So I'm Deb Rasmussen. I am a digital learning consultant at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and I'm also the facilitator of our community of practice at HWS, and I'm so thrilled to have with me some of the members of our community practice here. So starting at the bottom, this is Kristen, and she is a professor of Russian studies, and Juliet is the director of digital learning, and Ilana is a chemistry professor, and Emily is a research instruction librarian. So to be clear, we don't have all the answers yet about flipped learning, but we are trying to figure it out together as we go, and we're still hanging in there. So we've been meeting for 3 semesters now, and we gather face-to-face every month. And then in between those sessions, we connect asynchronously through either our email or our learning management system. So from the perspective of facilitation, I have 7 suggestions that I can offer you if you're interested in starting a community of practice on your campus. And then I'm gonna turn the mic over to my folks here to give perspectives from the participation aspect of a community of practice. So first of all, I would say you are not alone. So don't try and go it alone, because there are so many resources out there for you now. If you've been flipping for a while, you know people tended to work in silo for a long time, but thankfully now there's some great resources. So is anyone familiar with Flip Learning Network? How about FLGI? AALAS? So the Flip Learning Network is kind of the first global community that came out with kind of a formal definition of flipped learning, and that was in 2014. And then FLGI kind of took the path of certification and training, and they have also a very rich global community, and they revised that definition a little bit just a year ago in 2018. And from their work with the Global Standards Project, they then developed this nonprofit arm, which is AALAS. And they focus specifically on disseminating best practices for flipped learning. So again, if you haven't been to these different resources, please check them out. And I'll have a link for you at the end to all of these. So as you're thinking about starting a community of practice, like the first question is like, who do I even invite? So I would say think very broadly. Think about those early adopters on your campus, of course, and those champions that you have. So when we first started, I invited folks who had already worked with our team, who were trying to integrate technology into the curriculum to help enhance that face-to-face time. Those who were already trying to do some more active learning, of course, those who are already flipping, and then those folks who were known to be really learner-centered faculty in their teaching approach. And I think that really helped to give us kind of a broad perspective in our conversations about what flipped learning can be and what it's not. So as you're thinking about those early adopters, kind of branch out. Don't limit yourself just to faculty, I would say, or those departments that you always work with. So we have a pretty diverse group, and I think it really makes a difference for us that we can kind of get a broader perspective. So when we're talking about challenges of flipped learning, we have a lot of folks around the table to hear those challenges, so that then we can come up with solutions that can really help to help break down those barriers. And I think that's really been helpful as we've tried to identify, what are the challenges that we're facing. So this idea of an organic evolution. So admittedly, when we started, I said, I just want to get folks together to just start talking about flipped learning, and we'll see where it goes. And here we are 3 semesters later, and I would say we're still hanging on to that organic evolution. So each time we get together, I kind of listen for, what are those knowledge gaps I'm hearing? What are those pain points that I'm hearing that folks are experiencing? What are the technology needs that are missing? And then I kind of keep a pulse on the global trends that are happening in the global community. And then I kind of pick one of those that seems most urgent, And then I kind of develop that between the session, and that is what I highlight, and that's what we focus on for the next session. And I think that's really helped us to accomplish some short-term goals without it being a formal process of saying, here's our goal, here's what we're going to do. It just naturally happened through this idea of kind of just-in-time moments that we tried to address. So 3 semesters in now, when we got together the last time, I said to folks, you know, here we are, is this still valuable? Are you getting anything out of this? And the answer was yes. And so then I said, okay, what are we doing with this? Where do we want to go? And so then we started to kind of think about our long-term goals. And we kind of settled with the idea of reaching more out to the campus, because we were kind of in this small group, this cadre that had just been meeting kind of quietly. And one of the things we realized because of our time together and talking about all those pain points is that just in spite of all those global recommendations about preparing your students and getting them on board, we still had pockets, especially where we had really student resistance, especially for those faculty who were trying not to be point perspective with giving everything a point and just wanting their students to kind of buy into this active learning philosophy. So that's something that we've identified that we kind of need to work on developing almost a recipe of sorts that works for our students on our campus to kind of get their buy-in. So that's one of our long-term goals. And then this whole idea of a common language has become another theme that has come from these long-term goals. So we've also identified that there's a need to have a resources site locally on our campus that folks can go to for flipped learning. The global communities are fantastic, and you can find so many resources out there, but they are spread across a broad range. So you have anything from K-12 to now industry, which is really going crazy with flipped learning. So sometimes it's hard to hone in on exactly what you're looking for as higher education in a small liberal arts college. So we have a resource site in our own learning management system that we're developing that has resources and also kind of some modules that are actually instructional in nature to help folks understand what flipped learning is and what it isn't. And we've also developed a template to get us started that we're going to be piloting for a few courses in the fall semester so that we can then revise it and then share that with faculty in the spring. And another thing that we're doing to kind of hone in on this common language is that we've all enrolled in one of the certification courses through FLGI. There's a new higher education certification course, which is really great. If you've never taken one of their courses, John Bergman is fantastic. You know, he's on the light board and he just makes everything so easy, which is really important with flipped learning. So that's another thing that we're doing. And I would say that we learned what flipped learning was through doing flipped learning. So each of the sessions, I tried to incorporate some component of flipped learning. So in the beginning, it was more formal, and as we were trying to figure out what flipped learning was. But then after that, I tried to kind of offer a pre-read or a pre-reflection or something so that we took something out of that group time together, put it into the individual space beforehand to get folks thinking so that we had more time in that group space, which is exactly what flipped learning is. So I think that was really helpful, especially for me as the facilitator, to practice designing for flipped learning outside of the classroom. So is it more work? Yes. Does it take more effort? Yes, on top of everything else you're doing. But from my perspective, and you guys can argue this, please, I would definitely say that it's worth it. Just to have a community right on campus that I can go to for questions, for challenges, to share successes and excitement is really fantastic. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn over to my colleagues virtually, and would love to hear from their perspective of what they felt about the experience. Emily, do you want to?
Yeah, so I have
see if I can
as a librarian, I feel like a slightly different perspective than some of our for traditional faculty members, because I don't have just one, a class of students that I work with through an entire semester. I see them just kind of one shot, one at a time. But something that we have done that I think has been really useful in both the developing a common language and then also modeling the flipped learning is that Deb mentioned that there's a template that we're getting ready to do some more piloting with. And a little bit earlier in the process of creating the template, Deb and I worked with a team of librarians and digital learning consultants that is kind of a separate team we have on campus, but we modeled flipped learning for them by putting them through the paces of a flipped course. And a flipped lesson. Yeah. And so we had, prepared some readings and some videos for them ahead of time, and then gave, in the individual space, and then had an activity in the group space that was a really powerful way to introduce the rest of our teams to these ideas and to this common language, which I think was really powerful.
Yeah, and I would say that it was really neat to see people think of flipped learning differently, and that it could be something beyond the classroom. And instead of just saying, this is what flipped learning is, we had an experiential moment, and I think that was really helpful. Yeah. It was great to work with Emily on that too, to actually kind of hone into, okay, this is what we've been talking about, now let's try and put it into practice, which was really neat. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome.
Who would like to share next?
I guess I can just kind of go off of that. So as a faculty member, I've been really interested in active learning, but I never really experienced it as a student. And so it's like I can read about it, but it can be difficult to actually get up in the classroom and do this work. And so what's been so helpful for me is actually all the modeling. So seeing what Deb does via videos, and then what we actually do in the sessions, that's been really helpful for me to see and then think about how can I incorporate this in my own classes. And at the same time, just this support network that, helping me remember there are little things that I don't, I kind of get caught up in the details and I forget to think through all of the specifics. So the template and just having this group to talk through with has been very helpful.
Thanks, Alana. Yeah, and just to kind of go off of that, that's where these standards have really come in now that you can tap into. We kind of get used to doing what we're comfortable with and doing maybe the same thing we've been doing with Flipped. But once you get comfortable with it, then see where you can expand out. And that's where those standards are really nice, because then you can self-evaluate, gosh, am I doing it here? What am I missing here? And this might help my students be able to go deeper when we get together. So I'm really grateful for those standards. Of course, not everyone is going to meet your need. We saw some and we kind of challenged it, saying, what is this about? I don't get this. And that's great. That's what this community is about, right? Where we can challenge ideas and assumptions and come up with really what makes the most sense for us. Thanks, Alana.
So I guess I will go next and say a couple of things. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the first thing for me is the modeling that Emily and Alana have both mentioned has also been really valuable for me, because all of the literature says, participate in flipped learning or blended learning, experience it for yourself. And for me, I'd never been able to do that in an authentic way until participating in this group and going through some of the modules that Deb had developed. And so because I was motivated to learn the information she was presenting anyway, combining the structure and the content, what was a really effective experience for me, and changed some of the ways that I'm approaching making my own asynchronous learning objects. So especially, some of her videos would start with Deb on screen talking to us, which is something that I had avoided. I had been doing digital whiteboarding, and suddenly I realized what a different atmosphere it created to be able to have that connection with the person who was teaching you. And so that has changed some of what I'm going to be doing moving forward. Another thing I think So I started my project for beginning Russian language in 2013. And by the time this group started, I was feeling some burnout. I felt like, to an extent, I had accomplished what I could on my own. It had had enormous impacts on my methodology and on what I did in the classroom. So I was pleased with the project, but I also felt really isolated. And so for me, having this group to use as a sounding board, people sort of the crowdsourcing power of people exploring so many different ideas, apps, techniques, really made me feel like I could bring in some new things without having to do everything myself. And so that's been really valuable to me as well.
Thanks, Kristen. I think one of the things also that is really helpful that you touched on, Kristen, was that idea of teacher presence in the individual space with our students, because we can get into this perspective of, I'm going to just put some stuff online that they can view, right? But then they're missing that key piece of teacher presence, of you being there to kind of guide them through, just like you would in a classroom, right? You talk through the different experiences you're taking them through. So think about how you can do that in that individual space, because if you're using a learning management system, that offers a great opportunity for you to bring your own voice in there, whether it's text or whether it's a 1-minute video of saying, hey, this is really important because, or take notice of this in this resource. So, and I think that is one of the things that they talk about in the global community, just about the importance of not disconnecting that individual space and having it just be this online just place to throw things per se. Great, thanks, Kristen. And so, Juliet, give me a second. I'm going to pull you up here and pin you. Juliet.
Everything that folks have shared so far certainly resonates with me as well. The piece I think I'd like to call out here is that standing before you and Deb is a tremendously humble and talented individual, and the role her skills and expertise to cultivating this, I would say, flourishing COP environment needs to be acknowledged and celebrated as part of this story. It's a critical component of the model that we're sharing. You should know that Deb sought out training and certification in flipped learning and is also an experienced group facilitator. And the latter reflects skills, I think, that sometimes we take for granted, that somebody can be a content expert, right, but doesn't necessarily have the skills, the talents to pull people together, either virtually or face-to-face when we come in a room. And she embodies all of that. And if you're interested in pursuing this model, I want to encourage you to invest in really, tapping someone and intentionally helping them develop to have some of the theoretical framework and emerging best practices to be ahead of the group, so to speak, right? They don't need to be, years ahead of everybody. They really can't be, but just enough ahead to serve as a group resource to anchor everything. And there are very accessible ways to pursue that. And I encourage you to talk with Deb one-on-one later to get going on that.
Thanks, Juliet. And definitely, certainly, FLGI would be happy to come and work with you. So if that is something that you're interested in, reach out to them too. But, identify somebody, if it's you who's always been flipping and just wants to share that experience with others, I would encourage you just to take the bull by the horns and do it. Thanks, Juliet. Thanks, you guys.